Hey everybody, welcome back to the Egg Show. Today's special guest is Luis Baez. Luis, how are you?
I'm great, my friend. How are you?
I am so good and thrilled to death to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So let's kind of, I guess, just start at the beginning. We're just meeting each other. So let's talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what your background is.
Yeah. Very long story short is that I am someone that stumbled into this amazing career in sales and tech after being someone who was first generation, first in their family to go to college, failed at being the doctor, failed at being the lawyer, and then stumbled into being the business person. I got my start in advertising sales after a friend referred me into WebMD. And after 8 rounds of interviews, knowing nothing about tech or advertising or anything, I definitely walked away confirming that I had the ability to sell myself and to persuade people to consider the things that I have to offer. So I ran with it. And this career has taken me down this amazing path. I've been recruited to work at companies like LinkedIn, Tesla, Google, Uber. I've also been in sales leadership. So I've led teams across North America and around the globe. And now I've stepped away from being the seller after over 600 million in revenue impact as an individual contributor. I now sit in the domain of revenue enablement. So coaching, training, certification, everything, aligning everything operationally to just make sure that we can smooth out the sales and the customer experience.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, and I think it's going to be really great to have a conversation around your expertise. Just in that, I think a lot of people, especially small business owners, startup founders, people like that, so many people go into business because they have a trade or a skill or whatever. Most people don't start on the sales side, right? So they don't begin their operation thinking about how they're going to sell it. And so I think it's really important to do that, or at least, factor in sales at some point, because obviously if you want to stay in business, that's pretty critical. But I think for a lot of people that don't do it, there's all kinds of reasons they point to, lack of knowledge, fear, things like this that, keep people from going out and doing sales. But I wonder if we could sort of begin with you in talking about sort of the things that you learned in working with some of these big, SaaS companies. And then let's talk about how we can maybe apply some of the truths that apply at scale to our smaller operations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way that I was able to learn was actually stepping away from my corporate life. So while I was working at Tesla, Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, devastated things on the island, impacted my family. That's where I'm from, and that's where most of my folks are. And I had to step away from that like full-time corporate grind, step into consulting, right? Something that was a bit more flexible, allowed me to be more available and to help with all the sort of relief efforts that were happening. And it was then that I came to this realization that my entire career up until that point was preparing me for this path of entrepreneurship, right? It was something that I did. It was a path that I walked because of circumstance. And then it was when I realized like, wow, I have developed this capacity for understanding the customer, understanding how things should operate, how things are connected across the different functions of a business. It cemented my capacity to wear different hats. And I was able to really extract from my corporate experience that even though I thought entrepreneurship was a totally new thing or a totally new experience for me, I didn't realize that I'd been an intrapreneur for years before stepping into being an entrepreneur, meaning I was working for a company, working in sales, growing a book of business. I just didn't have that overhead that an entrepreneur would have. Things like legal and marketing and things like that. That was all taken care of for me, right? And all I had to do was sell the product. And so that is that contrast and being, part of this like winning team and bigger organization to then being the solopreneur and trying to build everything around me from scratch. That's when I really came to realize what those lessons that I was able to get from my corporate experience.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I think that, for a lot of people, that's kind of a route that many people take, right? They begin working for somebody else and they start a side business or whatever, and that's sort of how they find their way into entrepreneurship.
Yep.
So I think that's a pretty natural way of making the transition. And I'd like to maybe dig in a little bit more on sort of the transition from intra to entrepreneur and see if we can maybe understand some of the differences, right? Because I think it's obvious to the person who's made the change. But I wonder if you had anything in particular, that were learnings or things that you discovered in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I took for granted, all the work that goes into getting something ready for going to market, meaning I knew that I could produce things, deliver things, build things for other people and for other businesses. And so I started putting out all these services and these packages that I was creating. Um, I didn't really do the work of validating what I was offering, sitting with customers, really, fine tuning the marketing, the messaging, and the positioning of what it is that I was offering. I got way ahead of myself because my strength was sales and getting on the phone and getting people to pay attention to what I was offering. I started to recognize that there's a lot more that goes into producing something and creating something that actually is a sustainable business.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Another thing I wanted to lean into a little bit is just given your cultural heritage and coming from the island Puerto Rico. Um, can you talk about? I mean, and maybe there's nothing, so I'm just kind of making a reach here. But I mean, is there anything that sort of, I guess, your cultural background? I mean, obviously, I guess you sort of grew up American, but the sort of just having ties to another culture that's maybe different than sort of traditional American culture. You have the gift of multiple languages. I assume you probably speak how Spanish or the Puerto Rican
Okay,
version of
see.
Spanish, and all these things. And so, I mean, how has that helped you in your journey? Like, have you discovered maybe unique insights or different ways of looking at things that maybe wouldn't come obviously if you just lived sort of a traditional life as an American person?
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you so much for asking it. I think two things that I'll bring to the table. One is that even though I grew up in New York City, I still spent a significant amount of time in Puerto Rico as a child. And so I grew up with this contrast of the concrete jungle and then that sort of island life, right in the countryside in the heart of the island. And yes, I was able to speak both languages. I learned how to speak Spanish first. And so having, that sort of cultural intelligence of being able to move through those environments, and being able to even transition from English and Spanish in different sort of spaces as needed, definitely an instinct and a skill that I developed. But then layer that with the fact that I did grow up in New York City. And so I grew up with every creature of every walk of life. We're rubbing shoulders on the subway. I've developed an ear for different languages. I've developed, a way of interacting with people that are different than me. I've learned ways of respecting, engaging, mannerisms, eye contact, right? Like all those things are things that you just pick up from those sort of everyday interactions. And how that translates in the boardroom is that I have that capacity to sit at the table and I can deliver the IQ. I can deliver the emotional intelligence, and I can also deliver the cultural intelligence needed to bridge the gap in the way that products and services and customer experiences are designed to make sure that they're all inclusive, right? To make sure that all stones are turned and all things are considered, and that we're not leaving anyone excluded or leaving any revenue on the table.
Are there any, I guess, obvious things that are, done differently in the way that like maybe a Puerto Rican people in general,
Mhm.
obviously there's going to be variation here, but generally speaking, in terms of attitude towards entrepreneurship, the way that people address creative small businesses. And the reason I ask is I have I mean, obviously I'm a Midwest American boy, but I have spent a lot of time over the last maybe 5 or 10 years in Spain and have tried to do business in Spain. And I've learned a lot about sort of just the cultural differences between the way they do business and the way we do business and the way
Yeah,
they feel about entrepreneurship, all the way up
yeah,
to sort of the corporate and legislative levels,
yeah,
all the way down to the individual, striking out on their own. And so I
yeah.
wonder if just, as an extension of our prior question, if there's anything that you can think of, that are just in terms of the sensibilities of Puerto Rican people. And I just kind of want to dovetail that into, I mean, obviously the New York experience is a very different experience as well.
Yeah.
And, obviously, or I shouldn't say obviously, but for, a lot of people are familiar with the area. There are a lot of Puerto Rican people in New York. I mean,
Yeah.
is one of the places where many people have settled. And so that juxtaposition, I guess, is what I'm trying to understand, right? Because if I
Yeah.
don't know about Puerto Rico, but if it's anything like Spain, it's a totally different like
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah.
So I guess trying to mix that, the Puerto Rican approach with sort of the New York or sort of, hustle and bustle Manhattan kind of
Yeah.
approach,
Yeah.
how that affected you and the way that you've, coached people now.
I love this question, Ryan. No one's ever asked me this. Thank you so much for this opportunity to reflect on this. I think, as I'm listening to you and I'm thinking of examples or I'm thinking of influences and my outlook, certainly in Puerto Rico, the majority of our economy is, small businesses. About 80% of our economy is small business. And so there is this sort of spirit of, if you want it, go get it. Right. And we're going to applaud you and support you. We're going to show up at your business. We're going to refer people to you. But if you want it, get up and go get it. Um, and even thinking about the way that businesses are built, right? It is a very sort of tribal thing. It is about leaning into your neighbors and leaning into your network and people around you to support you. And so, I've always thought of the effort of building a business or any new venture as being very collaborative, right? That's just my natural instinct to tap other people's shoulders and to bring people in. Whereas, like, I think about my experiences in New York being so cutthroat and so competitive, a lot of people keep their cards very close to their chest, right? And so it's less about, that sort of collaborative spirit and more so about bringing in the key players, right? Like just the ones that you need at the table and no one else. And so and thinking about even my own sort of personality and I'm someone who's very introverted, but when I step into business spaces, I'm quite extroverted, right? I am fueled and energized by ideas, innovation, and brainstorming and problem solving, right? And thinking about sort of the way that in my own culture, like, we are encouraged to be extroverted, to connect with people, to dance, to display. There's an expression, lo que no se exhibe no se vende. If you don't display it, it never gets sold, right? So if you're going to be shy, you're never going to get what you deserve.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, and it sort of leans into, at least in my experience in Spain, and I will say it's certainly not exclusive. I mean, we have something very similar here, which is that if you really want to do business in Spain, so much of it boils down to your relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
They need to know you, like you, trust you. And not to say that that doesn't exist in the States too, but as a guy who sort of grew up in the internet era and built my business on the back of the internet,
Yeah.
I can't even tell you how many clients I've had over the years who have never even met in person.
Yeah.
We've just transacted by email. I offered a service. They needed a thing. We got it done. You know what I mean? Yeah. And there was no formal handshake required. Where in Spain, on the other hand, it's like, okay, well, we're going to nurture you for weeks or months or years. We're going to, send baby clothes when you have a new baby. We're going to meet for beer and drinks. We're going to, stop for a meal, and those sorts of interpersonal things are the only way that you jump the line ahead of, like, their cousin or their friend or their neighbor.
Yeah.
Right. And so to your point about New York being sort of the opposite of that, which is everybody's really cutthroat and, it's kind of everybody fighting for every last scrap, that mentality of sort of feast or famine.
Yeah.
It seems to me that, I don't know, for lack of a better term, or maybe this is too broad of term, but like a Latin style, which is just a more relaxed approach to business that's more built on the fundamentals of interpersonal relationships and things like that, is not only more rewarding, but also maybe better in the long run.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that there's a juxtaposition of, like, working to live and then living to work. Right. And so, when I think about, culturally at home, we work to live. We work so that we can enjoy the things that we do outside of work. But then, like, in New York, it's the most overworked city in America, right? It's you grind, right? You're the first one in before the boss. You're the last one out after the boss leaves. And that's just your schedule. There is no 9 to 5.
Yeah. Well, and I guess part of that is powered by rent. So some of it's a little out of necessity than anything else. All right. So let's kind of turn the corner a little bit. I think that's really interesting stuff. And I think that, not only bringing just sort of your, I guess, Silicon Valley experience to the table, but also bringing this, cultural perspective, I think could make some of these next, topics maybe very interesting for people. I want to talk about sales enablement and strategy in general, and like kind of what that term means. I think a lot of people understand the concept of sales, and, maybe at some big corporate level, they understand the enablement side. But in your sense, or in your case, as somebody who comes in and trains people to be, a proper salesperson or build a sales team, how can we talk about sales enablement in the frame of, small business or startup, and, trying to figure out when we need to start leaning into sales and training people in sales, and how we do it if we don't have somebody who, maybe isn't a tech-centric founder. Maybe our company was started by somebody's skills and sales isn't their skill.
Yeah. Oh, that's an excellent question. For anyone that's starting a business, I remind them first and foremost, you are salesperson number one, right? This was your vision. This was your idea. This is your baby, right? And the outcome is driven by the ways that you translate that vision and empower and enable people around you to execute on that vision. And so the minute that you are ready to let go of the reins of doing all the sales yourself and you're ready to onboard someone else, that's where enablement begins. You are making an effort to not only give that person something to sell, right? A product or a service that's fine tuned and supported and delivery is all thought of in the background, et cetera, but that they have the confidence, the training, the certification, and even thinking about the tools and content that they need, right? Whether they need to have a demo environment to display an outcome, whether they need content, statistics and data and insights to help sell things through, right? All of those things are in the vein of enablement. And so the minute that you are letting go of those reins and passing them on to someone else, that's when the process begins. You have to take everything that's in your mind, everything that you've learned about the customer, everything that triggers them to buy, and you have to go ahead and teach that to the next person so they know how to handle and conduct those conversations. And then from there, you begin to scale, right? As you think about building a team, that's where you use tools like, learning management systems to host trainings. That's where you lean into group coaching and things like that. But, enablement is something that begins the moment that salesperson number one passes the reins to the next.
Yeah. Well, and maybe another way to think about this or another way to frame what you're describing here is basically the switch to true leadership, right?
Yeah.
So you're moving out of a position of, do it yourself realm, you're working on your skill or whatever. And now you need to grow a company. You need to move into a position of leadership.
Yep.
So on the leadership front, one of the things that you sort of espouse or one of the topics you like to talk about is becoming the leader that you would want, or the type of leader that you had always wanted yourself.
Yeah.
And most of us haven't had those leaders in life. Some of us have been blessed to have them, however. And so I wonder if maybe explore that concept of becoming the leader that you want, because I think a lot of people, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think a lot of people sort of get stuck on leadership in that, I don't know how to lead, therefore I just won't. Or, I don't know the best way to do a thing, so I'm not going to tell anybody how to do it. So they sort of almost talk themselves out of being a leader, when really just being a leader, is checking the boxes on a few different skills, empowering people to do the things they need to do, treating people in a way that's fair and equitable, I guess, or sort of, fair across the board, handling business in an appropriate way, working towards business objectives, things like that. Like there's all these little factors of leadership. And, but I think a lot of people talk themselves out of it just, out of fear or everything else. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just leadership in general, and then maybe how we can go from leadership into enablement and then actually start to scale our business.
Yeah. When I think about what it takes to become a leader, it begins with a level of self-awareness, understanding, how you tick and how you operate, your communication style, and then engaging other people to, lean into those strengths, right? And communicating them. So that's where the journey sort of begins. But then I also want to invite people to think about examples of leadership. I have, on one end, when I started my career in advertising sales, my example of leadership was pure dictatorship and authoritative and, leading by fear-based leadership, meaning I work with people that would grill you and drill you and embarrass you in front of your colleagues as a way of getting you to produce and squeezing results out of you. When I moved to California and I stepped into Silicon Valley, and I was recruited to work at LinkedIn, my very first sales meeting, it was my first tech job. My very first sales meeting, my sales director walks in. She's 2 minutes late and she apologizes to everyone in the room. And then she puts her laptop on the table and she projects her calendar on the screen in the room for everyone to see. And she has this like crazy color coded thing going on and she's walking through it and she's like, I'm sorry that I'm late. I was in a meeting to discuss this. You all asked for these things. This is when it's coming. These are the days that I'm working on it. These are the times that I'm able to get with people, right? There was this level of like total transparency and leading by example and setting the tone for not fear-based leadership, but instead presenting, what it is that you're working on in a very human way. and, presenting the things that you're working on and the things that are at risk and the things that, are really the places where you're vulnerable. And so when it was my turn to speak during that meeting, rather than, showing up with that fear and that anxiety of like, I've got to run my numbers, it's like, well, here are the things that I did my first couple of weeks on the job. Here are the meetings that I scored. Here are the things that I still don't know. And these are the things that I, really need help with. And in that meeting, everyone across the table reached out, offered help, set up time on the calendar, whatever it was that was needed for me to get up and running and be productive. Really stark contrast to the experience that I had earlier in my career. And so when I've stepped into leadership roles, I think about how I feel as an individual contributor. I want to work really hard for someone that respects me and lets me rock out and do my thing. I don't want to work so hard for someone that terrorizes me. And so I think about the way that I show up and make sure that I set a level of enablement and empowerment for everyone around me.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I think it's a great example too. And in fact, it sort of spurred a thought or an idea here or a conversation I'd like to have with you, or a question, which is, just talking about the value of transparency in business. This is something I think is really important, and I think it sort of breeds a good culture in the office, generally speaking. Yeah. But how do we avoid, or I guess, how do we balance transparency in the operations versus sort of, I guess, like the dreaded overshare? Right. Because I think one of the things that we need to try and remember, and maybe you have a different perspective on this, but there needs to be some delineation between leadership and people. It's sort of what they say about like parenting, right? You need to be the parent, not your friend, right? I'm not a friend to my kids. I'm their parent. And there's a difference. It doesn't mean we're not friendly, and it doesn't mean that we can't have similar, in some aspects, we may have similar relationships as friends, but there's still like a level of authority that needs to exist. Right. And I think, unless you've got some sort of structure where everybody's sort of flat, if you're responding to somebody, or if you have a person you're supposed to be answering to, there needs to be some way of, delineating that I'm not just your buddy, but I'm actually here to help facilitate or help make things better for you. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if, maybe transparency is the way into that conversation, but maybe there are other ways too. How do we balance out, or how do we, create a culture where, we don't get too caught up in like structure and title and hierarchy and things like that, but at the same time, provide a level of leadership that's necessary so that as we're building a corporate structure, we can start to, check all those boxes or hit all those different levels.
Yeah, great question. So a couple of levers that you'll want to think about pulling. One of them is the way that you show up with your people, right? Thinking about the way that you engage with your direct reports on one-on-ones. Are they leading the conversation, or are you? Right? If you're the one that leads the conversation, you're drilling with questions and you're insisting on numbers and structuring the conversation, that person will never develop a self-concept that's confident, and they'll never really feel good and truly, anchored in what it is that they're doing. What I like to do is instead reverse the experience. You set the agenda. You bring forth, the 3 or 5 things that you need to make sure are handled this week. And you let me know specifically what you need from me. What meeting do you need me to attend? Which email should I be firing off? Is there some kind of training or support that I need to get you? Right? So let's flip the script on these one-on-one meetings. And let's just even take a step back, because I'm assuming that you're having one-on-one meetings with your direct reports at a regular cadence, right? Let's make sure that's happening first and foremost. And secondly, let's think about the experience. Put them in the driver's seat of their career. Layer that with, thinking about what the onboarding experience is, or what the quarterly review experience is like, where you're reinforcing for that person what the expectation of their role is. I am counting on you to drive this portion of the business. I'm counting on you to ask me the questions and be vulnerable and be real about the things that you need to get the results that you deserve and that the business is looking for. Right? My role is to get you the tools, the introductions, the answers, right? But you're the one that's in the driver's seat, and these are the things that we're expecting from you. So you've got to set the tone, during onboarding. You've got to reinforce the tone during one-on-ones, and then think about even the opportunity in the vein of transparency, whether it's on a monthly or a quarterly basis, sort of like a team all hands, where you're coming to the table. You're aligning everyone around the priorities and the goals and the progress that's being made. You're giving accolades where they're due for people's contributions. You're asking for help where you see there are threats or gaps, right? And you're letting people understand, where the progress is and where the threats are. That's really important to bring everyone into that process. You don't have to be buddy buddy. You don't have to have lunch with everyone all the time, right? I understand that there is this sort of need for, to use your word, authority, or some kind of a figure of leadership that, isn't someone that is a friend, but instead is someone reliable, right? And so, very clear boundaries that aren't blurred, right? And so reinforce that, right? Reinforce that leadership is a two-way street, and bring people into that driver's seat of their career.
Yeah, I really like that. And that's a different way than I've heard a lot of people talk about leadership. So I think that that's really great. Especially this concept of, maybe it's not so much about leadership, but maybe it's about reliability.
Yeah.
As I'm just trying to, parse the things that you said, one of the things that you mentioned is putting people in the driver's seat of their own career. And, in the position of a leader who is, if reliability is what we're leaning into, then, being the person that they can come to for questions or to come for solutions to a problem that they're having in effort of trying to achieve their job, for example, or, trying to understand the expectations of their role and these kinds of things, being that sort of source of truth or that reliable, party that they can lean on for the different things, I think is a really good example, or a good way of thinking about leadership, different than just sort of this authoritarian sort of, top-down delineation. Rather the, conversations are coming from, for lack of a better way of talking about it, because they're coming from below, right? So the person who is your direct report is actually steering, or driving part of the conversation. You might, to your point, set the agenda and things like that, but really it's them who need to be talking. It's not you who needs to be talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So let's talk to a little bit further about one-on-ones then. So, do you have any kind of strategies or anything around, making the most of the one-on-one? So, obviously some of the sort of high level ideas that you just gave us, I think will be really useful, but, how can we make sure that we're not just having a one-on-one for the sake of it? I've been in a lot of corporate environments where we just have meetings for the sake of meetings.
Yeah.
And as somebody who's trying to constantly avoid meetings, I wonder if you have ideas for, how to make the most of the meetings that we do have to have.
Yeah, I think that, let the person that you're connecting with, your direct report, really help guide the cadence, whether they need to connect on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis. Get their sense for, what is their desired outcome? What do they expect from you as a leader? Some people need a little pep talk. Some people need to run numbers and get assurance. Some people actually just want to get to know what's going on in your world and what some of your priorities are, right? Like they might have career aspirations beyond where they are right now. And they're looking at you as a leader who's a few steps ahead and going, just teach me what you do, right? Like, or let me jump in on a project and run with you, right? And so establish what it is that person wants from these sessions. And then think about components of a conversation. If you're meeting with someone for 30 minutes on a biweekly or a weekly basis, right? Then, and I'm going to, because I'm coming from the world of sales and revenue, I'm going to use, a one-on-one with the sales rep as an example. We'll spend maybe the first 5 or 10 minutes just jumping in really high level on pipeline and trends, right? New leads that are coming in. How are we pacing to goal? What are any sort of like trends that are, prohibiting you from closing, whether it's something happening macroeconomically that's scaring customers from investing, and we need to think about how to overcome those objections. Or it could be that there's something happening internally where there's a delay in delivering something and it's really delaying our process of closing. Maybe there's like a glitch in the way that we process contracts or something to that vein. So let's troubleshoot some of the higher level operational stuff up front, because that's usually where the anxiety is with the sales rep. They just want to know, like, I need help. I need to close. Are you going to get me what I need? Then I like to go through coaching, like actual coaching. So 5 minutes, pipeline review. I want to spend 15 minutes focusing on 1 or 2 accounts, because we can talk about all 100 deals that you've got in play. But I want to talk about the 1 or 2 that you are poised to close this week. And I want to think about the strategy and how we quarterback that close. What are the threats? What's the next logical step? What are the internal resources that we need to enlist? What are the commitments we're making by the end of the conversation and the timeline that we're committing to? So that then we make sure that these things are done before we meet again. right? And then, another component, and this is something that I leave at the discretion of anyone, whether you do it up front or at the end, but you want to make sure it's done. Whether you want to start the tone this way or whether you want to end the tone of your one-on-one this way, check in with your rep. Dude, when's the last time you took vacation? You know, how are things, with the team? How are we gelling with this new product? How are you gelling in the workplace, right? Like, get a sense for where they are, because you also want to assess as a leader any threats to someone leaving the company, right? If you've got a really good rep and they're frustrated about something that you can get ahead of, and you can create that space for them to lean in, let their hair down, open up to you, right? And that's something that you can solve to keep a really good rep. Yeah. Use that time in that space to connect with that person, right? Be human. Don't just drill someone, but be human with them.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think that maybe leads me into my next sort of category here, which is getting into sort of authenticity and, as it applies on a number of different facets. But most appropriate or most related to this one-on-one conversation, just to kind of put a bow on that, is I wanted to talk about sort of uncovering the goals of people. So in my own experience as a leader, I've had a number of opportunities to talk to different, people. And, one of the things I'm constantly trying to do is yoke out of them what do you actually want? What are you trying to achieve? And I think even for small business owners and things like that, like if you went to a lot of them and asked them what their goals are, like they just don't know, or they're going to give you an answer that kind of they think maybe pleases you or is maybe even somebody else's goal altogether. And so I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about that, just sort of teasing out, the goals or the actual intentions of a coworker. And I think part of it might be what you were just alluding to, which is taking a little bit of time to just be human with people. And so I think that could be a big aspect of it. But I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to highlight what we talked about earlier in terms of like putting someone in the driver's seat of their career, right? In terms of what needs to happen, right? When you're thinking about goal setting or intentions or sort of what drives and motivates someone intrinsically. I think that as a leader, when I step in as, a consultant or I step into a new business that I'll work for, I'm often hearing folks that are just like, our folks want promotions. They're acting really entitled. Everyone's whiny, complaining. And, I can't handle this anymore. Like I need results. It's like, okay, let's take a step back. Are they clear about the results that they need to be driving? Right. And then thinking about their experience, right? Whether there is an opportunity for a promotion in sight or not. People are motivated by this sense of growth and progress. And so by putting someone in that position to track their performance, to track what's trending, and to track conversations during your one-on-ones over time. That could be as simple as a Google Doc. It could be a slide somewhere. It could be an Asana board, whatever works for y'all, whatever works for your team and however you vibe, right? But the idea is that if that person is able to look at their progress over time, there's this heightened sense of accountability. And then there's this sudden awareness of like, you know what? I've been working hard, but I haven't been working on the right things. And I thought I was ready for a promotion, but I'm actually not. And what's going to take to get there is a focus on these three areas. And I know that, and I've developed that self-awareness because I've visualized and tracked the things that I'm doing. Right? That's why it's so critical for someone to be in that driver's seat of their career, because there are different ways to motivate and incentivize someone beyond promotions and bonuses and things like that. But even recognition, even that recognition of progress, like, hey, Ryan, you've done an amazing job over the last quarter in moving the needle in this direction and developing this skill, but I'm so excited for your next quarter. Right? That is why it's so critical, right? To get to understand what motivates and drives someone and how it is that they goal set, et cetera. Put them in that driver's seat. Let them drive the conversations.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really great. So let's extend this conversation about authenticity then into sort of sales and marketing communications. Yeah. So one of the things that's sort of happening as a sort of business cultural experience is people are moving to internet AI-based solutions. We publish to one network and publish to all at the same time. we automate, we, do all kinds of things to basically, I guess, cut out real life human interaction. And so, so one of the goals that I think that everybody is trying to achieve is sort of authenticity. So even though we're using these tools like, automated email programs or, AI leveraged social media posts, I think at the end of the day, we're trying to speed up how quickly we roll stuff out. But at the end of the day, we're still trying to be authentic, or we should be anyway. And so I wonder if you could talk about that sort of in your, sales process, or as you're trying to work with a company to help them enable a sales team on their end. How do you start to approach, keeping and maintaining a real authentic message, and then parse that against, trying to hit measurables and things like that, so yeah. We're not necessarily cutting corners to get to the end result.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think in the age of AI, I say that trust is a more fluid currency than it used to be, right? Because people are more willing to trust or invest their trust than they used to be, because there is this heightened sense of this healthy awareness, if you will, of automation and the ways that can break trust with customers. And so when customers are shopping around, they're expecting a chatbot. They're expecting automated emails, right? But they might not be expecting is a phone call. They might not be expecting a text message, or even someone getting on camera and personally delivering a message, right? There's so many tools like Vidyard and Video Ask and all these things that can be used throughout a sales process to break up that monotony of the automation, to remind that person that there's a human being that's part of their customer journey, right? And even thinking about those automations and those tools in the background to be intelligent about those moments during the buyer journey when they expect human interaction. They don't want you around while they're doing their research, but they'll want you there when they're ready to ask questions. They'll certainly want you there when they're ready to try something on for size. And they'll want you there when they're ready to make a transaction, because they want to make sure that after that credit card is swiped or after that wire transfer comes through, that the human being doesn't go away, that human interaction doesn't suddenly disappear, right? And so people are more willing to trust. It's a more fluid currency than it used to be. It sounds counterintuitive, but the thing is that they're willing and they're eager. They want that human attention, but in certain ways and at certain points in their buyer journey, right? I think about buying a Tesla. You can go online, you can pick the vehicle that you want, and you can do all your paperwork through the app and all those things. But when it's time to deliver the vehicle, you want like a human being to just kind of walk you through, assure you that it works, assure you that, it's all good to go before you drive it away, right? That human touch is important and expected before that person takes delivery. And so that's just something to consider in your own business. There's a place for automation to save everybody time, but there's a real need for trust building as well.
Yeah, and to that point, I think it's actually one of the things that's going to become even more important in the future. And maybe you can, speak to some trends or things that you're seeing in the landscape for sales. But it does seem to me that the trust aspect specifically is going to become very important in a world full of AI noise on the internet, I've heard a bunch of different directions for what people think that the AI is going to usher in, everything from Skynet and the end of the world to, great positivity and things that'll kind of move the ball along. But I think that one thing that, may end up being sort of undeniable is that the advent of AI is going to take some things like social media platforms and that kind of thing. And I think could get to the point where it introduces so much noise that it actually starts to kind of eat its own tail and become so disreputable that you can't even go to these different sources for anything kind of reliable. And I think at that point, it's going to be, instead of the rise of the machines, I think it could actually be the prime time for the rise of human beings again. Yeah. That we actually start to find that, okay, well, AI is a great tool and it can do a number of different things for us, and it can make, certain jobs more quickly done. It can, get certain tasks maybe done in a better or more organized way. But at the end of the day, it's going to end up being humans that have to emerge and have these sort of like real life human relationships, because I think ultimately it's what's going to be important to people. Especially when it's kind of a foregone conclusion that everything, could be biased, could be untrustworthy, could be automatically generated, could be whatever. So I wonder if you'd talk about just a little bit what you're seeing in terms of trends and, directional shifts and things like that in the sort of landscape of sales. Yeah. And, maybe more generally, like the sort of the whole sales environment. But, obviously feel free to tailor that to your own experience.
Yeah, I think when I think about companies that are using these tools intelligently, ethically, and seeing results that are deserved and desired, it's that combination of balancing the automation and the AI to uncover the right conversations and opportunities, and then leaning in that human touch with the way that you execute. So there are tools, for example, that will look at traffic to your website, correlate that with data in your CRM and on LinkedIn and elsewhere. And it will signal to you that there's a person that is primed and ready to buy. And this is what their title is. And here are some suggestions for maybe what to say to them, because here are some of their interests psychographically based on the fact that they are a director of operations versus a chief financial officer, right? The way that you engage those kinds of customers is going to be very different. And then once you have that sort of intelligence of this is the right person, this is the right time to strike and communicate with them, and here's the right sort of messaging to drive, then it's on you, right? That's that human touch, engaging them over phone, email, LinkedIn, InMail, even thinking about delivering, personalized video, right? That's where you start to pepper in that authenticity. It's like, hey, Ryan, little birdie told me that you're in the market for a new solution for X, Y, and Z. I happen to work for a company that has this. And if you're interested, I'd love to invite you to a conversation and see if, the shoe is the right fit for you.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. So I wonder too, so we talked earlier about sort of, your cultural background and sort of just the way you grew up and how that influenced the way you do business today. Yeah. I wonder if you could talk about, if in your career, if you've been mentored, if you had somebody you looked up to, if you've received key pieces of advice, if there's any I guess, wisdom that you could pass down, Luis.
Yeah, gosh. What I have learned from interacting with Fortune 500 C-level executives, founders of billion-dollar companies and startups, celebrities in the music and film and art spaces and sports spaces and all these things. What I've learned is that the people at the top are just paralyzed by imposter syndrome, right? They're paralyzed by thoughts of not enoughness, or it's all going to go away anytime soon, or someone's coming for me, I'm going to get found out, right? Or I'm just lucky, this isn't deserved, right? Those are the things that I have learned from these mentors and these sort of examples in my life. And when I start to have those thoughts, I remind myself that I have a choice, right? I can either choose to give in to those thoughts, step away, bow down, or whatever from the opportunity, or I can dance with those thoughts. Those thoughts are going to creep in and they're going to pass, right? I can observe them. I can witness them, right? It's kind of like, that creepy crawly thing in the middle of the night that makes noise that passes through or whatever. Let it go, right? And embrace and enjoy the things that I deserve. The progress, the growth, walking through doors that I didn't know existed, shaking hands with people I never thought I'd meet, right? I have to allow those things to continue. I can't allow myself to give in, or I won't get to tell the story about how successful I am and how I'm still grappling with imposter syndrome.
Yeah, no, I think that's great because you're right. I've obviously come across this a lot and am a, victim of it myself to some extent, dealing with this sort of imposter syndrome or this idea that for whatever you're doing or whatever you've received, you're not worthy. No. And I don't think it's totally right to absolutely quell that, right? Because I think some humility is probably not a horrible thing. Yeah. But at the same time, if you've worked hard for something and you've achieved something, you should allow yourself, at least that brief moment of pleasure to go, you know what, I did it. I reached the top of the mountain, or I achieved the goal I had hoped to achieve, that sort of thing. And I think in order to kind of keep going, if you never really feel that sense of satisfaction, and it's just dread when you get up every day because you don't feel like you're where you should be, maybe it's time to reassess what you're doing, but, alternatively, maybe you need to go easier on yourself.
Yeah.
One last thing I kind of wanted to ask you, and it's just sort of related to this too, is just, if there was any one thing that you wish you'd have known earlier in your career, what would it have been? And the reason I ask is, sort of in line with around this imposter syndrome and things like that, right? I mean, one concept might be that if we start to understand some of the things that, we'll later learn, that by getting an earlier start on it, we can maybe quell some of that. So at the same time, I've always kind of had this theory, like I think our interview that we're having today is something like the 360th or something interview that we've done on this show. Amazing. And one of the things that I've kind of learned is that it seems like there's no real shortcuts in life. And no matter what you do, and no matter who you listen to, and no matter what you read or whatever these things, you might learn little nuggets and things like that. But it isn't until you hit a certain point that you can actually even apply the knowledge that you've gleaned. That it seems to me that everything is just kind of this big layer cake. Mm-hmm. And we all kind of get to a lot of our sort of realizations or our wisdom or our whatever at the same time. Like everybody kind of, it requires a certain number of years of experience to kind of learn a thing. Right. And, you might apply that differently, or maybe there's some range and, some people get to it a little quicker than others or whatever. But I think that this idea of, and you've heard people talk about the overnight success. I mean, all the people that we've interviewed, literally without exception, all the way up to the top CEOs, to the top whatevers that have come on the show, almost nobody could have got there any faster than they did.
Yeah.
Right. Most of them are a 10-year overnight success, or more. And so, so I wonder if there was some sort of, cheat code or something that you could have given yourself to get to where you are today as a younger person. I'm curious if you have one. And then, second of all, would it have really made any difference? Or did you really need just all the life experience you've done to get to where you are today?
Gosh, I don't know that there is a cheat. I will say I did a lot of things alone. I kept my cards close to the chest. I was afraid to be vulnerable. I was afraid to ask for help or to admit that I didn't know certain things. Right. And so that resulted in overworking, overstressing, constant insecurity, late nights and weekends and all those things that could have been avoided. Right. Because there are also examples of burnout throughout my career. There was even an episode where I ended up in an emergency room, right, with an IV in each arm from complete burnout from being on the road and shaking people down for money, right? Like it was too much, right? And so, and I'm thinking even, beyond the sort of like self-care component, right? Even thinking about and accepting and embracing help to avoid that. Even thinking about the ways that I nurtured my mind and my spirit. I think I was so feverishly focused on the next business book, the next hack, the next thing, the next framework, the next, luminary who's, spewing the thing. I think I also needed to spend time away from the books, away from the screens, and thinking about just my own spiritual health as well. Right. Because I think that those moments where I burnt out or where I felt just completely lost and undervalued, is because I lost sight of that inner work as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's probably about as good an answer as you could give. I mean, really, I think so much of, happiness and work and maybe opposite of that, the burnout and the things that we do hit are often not that much tied to what it is we want or what we think we want, but we're busy chasing a thing that we think we want, or that we think you want, or that we think our boss wants, or whatever it is. And so we're putting all this effort in, in your example, you're out on the road and you're, just selling your ass off. But at the end of the day, I don't know, did that really align with your goals? Were you really trying to be a on the road salesperson all your life? And were you trying to kill yourself like that? Probably not. I mean, you seem like a pretty even keeled guy. You seem like a pretty laid back fella. You don't seem like a guy that's looking to just live out of your car.
Yeah.
And so, and granted, we've only known each other about 45 minutes. So I can't, I can only go so far with my judgment call. But, but at the end of the day, I mean, based on the character that I've been talking to today, you don't seem like the guy that's the life you're living. Now, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't do that job if that was the job somebody gave you. And the job is, if I want to be successful in sales and I want to get that fat commission check, I've got to do this thing.
Exactly.
But I think that misalignment between what you really want sort of in your heart of hearts and then what you're doing for a living or what you're doing for somebody else or whatever, that disconnect, I think, is where this, like, what we call burnout sort of lives.
Yeah.
Right. I think if you're doing the things that are right and you're doing the things that you like and you're, able to chase down the passions that you love, you'll never run out of energy for it.
Yep.
And an example you gave earlier was, when you're in the boardroom and you're surrounded by people who are trying to make decisions, that gives you power, it gives you energy, but I think that is because you have a true, at your core interest in helping people be successful.
Absolutely.
At your very, essence, this is what you want. And so when you're in a room like that, that feeds you, and you could do that job all day. And if you worked a 16-hour day, you wouldn't even notice.
Exactly.
But if you had to drive around all day and you're cruising around in New York traffic all day, like, you're not going to feel the same way after work. You're going to need a drink to take the edge off, and you're going to have to go to bed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a different kind of experience. So I think what you described there was this, at least at a, emotional or spiritual or whatever we want to call that level, it really is about finding what you want to do and being able to chase your passion, and not like in a cliche way. Don't chase your passion. Your passion isn't to get a Lamborghini in most cases. Your passion is actually to be financially secure or to be able to be in a position where you could afford the Lamborghini, but it's not really about the car. It's about all those other things that come with it, And so I think chasing down your passions in that way is really valuable.
Yeah.
I think through your experience, we can kind of learn the things that maybe we shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, here in the closing couple minutes, Luis, do you mind just where can people track you down online if they want to talk to you, if they want to learn more about your business? You actually, on your website, something I really like is you have that little video that you can watch, and you can kind of, play Choose Your Own Adventure or whatever with a little video clip. And I think to your point earlier about sort of, human interactivity, even in automation, I think that's kind of what we're talking about, right? There's a human behind that. And I think it's really important.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to comment on that because I quite like it.
Yeah.
But where can people track you down? How can they engage with you? And I don't know if you've got like a little elevator pitch or something about the work you do, but if you'd like to pitch, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Ryan. At the end of the day, I am just out here to share all the pages from my playbooks on how I did what I did and enable and empower the next person to walk the path that they want to walk. And so I took all those lessons and I boiled them all down to a course that you can sign up for. It's called Flex and Flourish. It's my leadership course, and it's available at learnfromluis.com. And so if any of what I said today vibed, if anything resonated with you, or even just my nature and my mellow vibe, you'll find it in that course, and you'll find some gems in there.
Well, thanks so much, Luis. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit and visit with me today. I think we covered a lot of ground. I mean, obviously, we could have gone on for hours on any one of these topics, but I think we did a good job getting across the spectrum of what you offer.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. See you guys next time.